Assemble.
Avengers Endgame was the movie event of the decade. Fans waited over 10 years to see the culmination of the Infinity Saga, and they were not disappointed with the concluding chapter.
No, give me that. You have the little one.
The film was surprisingly slow in the opening chapters, but ramped up in intensity, culminating in one epic battle scene in the finale. But while there was a lot to pack into those 3 hours, there was quite a bit that was cut, specifically from the jaw-dropping, crowd-pleasing final battle between every single MCU hero and the hordes of Thanos. Speaking of Thanos, let's start things off with him. For most of his screen time in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Thanos was just an angry purple alien sitting on a throne barking orders. In all honesty, if you never read a Marvel comic, you likely were not impressed with the promise of Thanos. Yet we knew that he was going to be the big bad that culminated 10 years of storytelling. So there had to be more to him than sitting down. Thankfully, Infinity War delivered on everything that makes Thanos great and then some. This resulted in him becoming one of the more compelling villains in the entire saga. He was ruthless, calculating, deranged, emphatic, and so much more. But there was more to Thanos that was cut during Endgame.
What, you wanted more?
And thanks to some gruesome imagery, we totally understand why this one was left on the cutting room floor. During the final showdown between the Avengers and Team Thanos, things are fairly straightforward, as Thanos from 2014 is brought to 2023 to make sure his original plan doesn't get undone, as the Thanos from the past learned that his future self was axed off and that Earth's mightiest heroes seek to undo what original Thanos has done.
That is destiny fulfilled.
Even in his 2014 version that hasn't committed universal genocide, Thanos is imposing and a force to be reckoned with. But in his original pitch version of an encounter with the Avengers, things would have been way more harrowing. The pitch saw 2014 Thanos find the Avengers in his 2014 timeline and utterly destroy them all before making his jump into the future to face them again on the battlefield. When he was to come face to face with the team that lobbed off the original Thanos' melon at the beginning of Endgame, he kindly returned the favor by tossing the head of Captain America onto the battlefield before the Avengers. The scene was meant to throw the Avengers off their game, using fear as a tactic to illustrate that he's already beaten them and that he is about to do it again. To quote Joe Russo, "We had most of the script working except for the third act, because Anthony and I were clinging to this concept that we wanted Thanos to walk up to the Avengers and throw Captain America's head on the ground." It wasn't just the Russos that seemed to be obsessed with the idea of skulls and heads when coming up with imagery for Thanos. Kevin Feige himself was toying with the idea of Thanos operating from a throne of skulls and bones, and Thanos would lob Cap's head like a bowling ball towards the Avengers from his heavy metal-inspired throne that would put the one from Game of Thrones to shame. Not exactly the best imagery for a PG-13 blockbuster concluding chapter, but they were seriously tempted. In fact, it seems that logistics and storytelling in getting Thanos from A to B was more of a concern in this account than the imagery itself, as the team felt having Thanos bounce around or having the Avengers go into his ship to see the throne didn't make sense. So the concepts were scrapped in favor of Thanos' ship simply landing and Thanos getting straight to business. Regardless, the scene was never shot, leaving us only to imagine what a hardcore Thanos would have been like. Just about all of the final battle in Endgame is on the ground, with Thor, Cap, and Iron Man having a more intimate duel with the Mad Titan before literally everyone gets involved once the snap is undone and emerges on the battlefield through the magic portals. As mentioned, most of this battle is on the ground, with Iron Man, Rescue, and War Machine flying in the sky alongside some Ravager ships and Pegasus from New Asgard in some quick shots. But there was something that was cut from the sky in this instance, and that was Crag Lands' big moment. In this cut sequence, Crag Land fights an aerial battle that was actually shot but cut from the final sequence. Fans will be happy to know that Crag Land has a similar metallic mohawk to Yondu's from the first Guardians film and still has his fancy lethal arrow with him too. Sadly, he didn't get to use it in this particular sequence as he was too busy flying about in a Ravager ship. Seeing as the scene relies heavily on green screen, we don't have to know who Crag Land would be sharing the sky with, but we can assume that this bit would have likely involved the Ravagers teaming up with the Wakandan airships to fight the airborne Chitauri. But seeing as so many recognizable heroes were fighting on screen together for the first time, the aerial battle with ships and one minor character was understandably cut. Justice for Crag Land, anyone?
Yeah,
This wasn't the only heroic moment that got slashed from the climactic battle in Endgame. This was the scene that brought all the heroes from all franchises together, and as such, we got some pretty awesome and unlikely team-ups during the epic battle. One such moment was unfortunately left out of the movie, and that moment involved a team-up between Okoye from Black Panther and Valkyrie from Thor Ragnarok and the upcoming Thor Love and Thunder. And while all the ladies of the Marvel Cinematic Universe did get their moment to shine together, Okoye and Valkyrie actually had a scene featuring just the two of them. Thanks to unused concept art, the duo was intended to swap their respective weapons with each other, allowing an Asgardian to fight with a Wakandan weapon and vice versa. It would have been cool and a fun little moment, but in the midst of a ton of fan service and epic wins, it likely had to be shaved out of the movie as it was already pushing 3 hours in length and the film already included a weapon swapping scene when Cap began to use Mjolnir in battle, which, let's face it, that moment was so awesome that any other weapon swap scene would have paled in comparison.
I knew it.
Speaking of Cap lifting Mjolnir, which may be the movie moment of the decade, there was some stuff centered around that whole entire bit that didn't make the final cut of the movie. There's unused concept art for Endgame that shows a reluctant and uncertain Steve Rogers attempting to lift the hammer. While the artwork looks like Steve is reaching for the hammer, the artist for that specific piece, Ryan Meinerding, stated that he wanted Cap to feel uncertainty about whether or not he could actually be worthy of lifting up the hammer from the ground, rather than it flying straight into his hand. As you all remember, the Mjolnir gag was set up all the way back in Age of Ultron when Cap attempted to lift the hammer from the table, resulting in the smallest of budges. This scene was initially meant to invoke that scene, but we think that the final result in Endgame was more surprising and satisfying. So we know the final battle was awesome and was immensely crowd-pleasing, but it was already pretty long, which is why there are so many cuts to the action sequences to begin with. This scene no doubt would have made the scene even longer, but likely would have felt more like padding as opposed to offering anything of real substance. But thanks to a leaked behind-the-scenes photograph, it looks like there would have been a small reprieve in the action for our heroes as they huddle up in a trench, preparing for the next move. The scene in question was said to be around 3 minutes in length, which is a pretty long scene of dialogue while in the middle of a battle, especially when the battle is against Thanos and his horde. It likely broke the flow of the action, which is why it was scrapped from the movie in favor of keeping the momentum going, and that's coming from the writers of the movie themselves, Chris Marcus and Stephen McFeely. The pair thought that breaking up the action for a, quote, fake and fraudulent scene, end quote, with no natural dialogue felt so weak that they didn't even believe the scene would make the final cut. The film was a lengthy one, and that may have been part of the reason as to why this next scene was cut, as it was ultimately redundant despite being visually awesome. After declaring for the final time that he is Iron Man and sacrifices himself for the universe, Tony dies.
Iron Man.
The Avengers, no matter from what corner of the world, all take a knee, as they've likely heard of him if they didn't directly know him. That is, everyone but Gamora, who is the 2014 version of the character in this scene. As everyone falls to their knees, she is left standing, unfamiliar with who Tony is. The Russos ultimately cut this scene as they felt it took some of the thunder away from the upcoming funeral scene. One thing that this scene does confirm, though, is that 2014 Gamora is 100% alive and well, a fact that we assumed but didn't get any clear answers by the end of the movie. One of the people at the funeral scene was naturally Morgan Stark, daughter of Tony and Pepper. Morgan was a surprise addition to the narrative as Endgame jumps the narrative 5 years into the future and Tony is settled into a domestic lifestyle with a family.
I love you 3000.
But while Morgan was played by Lexi Rabe, she wasn't the only actress set to play Morgan in Endgame. Katherine Langford, perhaps best known thanks to her role in 13 Reasons Why, was also brought on to play an older version of Morgan. After Tony snapped his fingers wearing the gauntlet, he was initially supposed to have his own metaphysical moment, much like how Thanos saw Gamora after his own snap in Infinity War. The Russos decide that audiences don't know Morgan that well yet, and breaking away from the action to spend time with a minor character may have been nice for Tony, but may have taken the audience out of the film a bit to see a new version of Morgan appear so suddenly. Instead of having a deep moment, we would have likely been wondering who this person is at first, which would have taken away from the scene. At least we know Tony got to see Morgan grow up, sort of, before leaving us for good. Despite Langford being cast in the movie, this important deleted scene has yet to actually surface, making us wonder if the Russos even got around to filming it, despite Langford being cast. Do you think this scene should have been left in the movie? Let us know! Those are all the scenes that we found that were cut from the final epic battle in Avengers Endgame. Do you think Marvel and the Russos should have kept some of these scenes in the final cut of the film, or were they wise in trimming down the fat, so to speak? Let us know in the comments below, and be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this in your playlist every day. Thanks for watching.